morning, everyone. Welcome to Coffee Talk. We are your hosts, Southborough Youth and Family Services. My name is Sarah Castle, and I am the Director of Southborough Youth and Family. And with me this morning, I have Megan Island, who is our Assistant Director. Good morning, Megan.
Morning.
We have Shannon Knyman, who is our Program Coordinator. Good morning, Shannon.
Hey, Sarah.
And we're so excited to welcome Johanna Sagarin. Johanna is I have to make sure I have your title correct. You are a clinical director, am I correct? Over
Yes,
at
ma'am.
the Carriage House, which is, you're gonna have to explain it to me. It's within Children's Friend. Within Children's Friend, I know that. Do you want to explain it to our viewers?
Sure. So as you said, I'm Johanna Sagarin. I'm a psychologist and I'm the clinical director in the outpatient child and family mental health clinic at Children's Friend, which is an affiliate of Seven Hills Foundation. And I'm also the director of our Carriage House Grief Support Center.
I should have just let you take it at the very beginning. That was so much better than
off my tongue for years and years.
Whereas I just went, because I knew there were lots of different affiliates here, but I wanted to make sure I got it right. My apologies for that.
Your what do you call them? Your business cards must be on like poster board.
Yes.
Hi.
Yes. Here, put this in your pocket. You might need to fold it a few times. That's great. Or it could be like a little scroll.
Like, I like that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Flash drive.
Yeah, there you go. We should just keep going. We could go all day here. Well, let's start with our coffee toast. Best way to start our morning here. Happy Tuesday. So we're going to be talking with Johanna in a couple of minutes about grief and loss. Johanna mentioned that she is a psychologist and the clinical director and a grief counselor with Children's Friend at the Carriage House. I'll make sure I get all of that in there. And so we're going to be talking with her about that, as this has been a challenging year for many, but also grief and loss are part of life. And so I think, we're planning to talk about that as part of the conversation too. We were trying to think of a fun way or something lighthearted to start our conversation this morning. We were kind of running through our minds as to what's coming up, and I landed on the fact that it's Easter Sunday this weekend. My family celebrates Easter, and I bought some fun activities for my kids like a month ago and completely forgot about the fact that, or I guess didn't even really appreciate it, that Easter's upon us already. So we're going to have an intense Easter weekend doing all the things we can possibly think of, because I've got lots of stuff that I purchased that we just have to use. But was it Johanna, was it you that mentioned you had heard a fun fact about Easter?
About Peeps flavored soda, I think maybe Pepsi.
Peeps flavored soda.
Peepsy.
Peepsy. That's great. Oh man.
What would Peeps flavored Pepsi, like what do Peeps taste like? That's just a question right there, like sugar.
Pure sugar.
Yeah, I guess it's like marshmallow flavored Pepsi. Peepsy.
But are they? But do they taste like marshmallows?
I don't know. It's been a while.
Are we curious enough to try it?
Ooh.
The question.
Actually, can we get our hands on Peepsy? It's totally not called that. We've just decided that it's the best way to refer to it. But did they say on, wait, don't tell me, where we could get our hands on this?
They did not.
I might have to do some research.
I'm game. I have a dentist appointment in a couple of weeks, so as cavities I get.
Oh man. What did I see recently too? Oreos makes a bunch of really strange
Yes,
flavored.
they do. Yeah.
Yeah. I saw one in the grocery store recently and I kind of went, ooh, I forget what it was though, but it was hot pink cream in the middle.
That
Maybe it
sounds
was
natural.
Lady Gaga, I think. It's not Lady Gaga flavored Oreos, thank God. Yikes. But I think it was something inspired by Lady Gaga.
Lipstick flavored.
Yeah,
Oreos.
maybe. Yeah, yep. Okay, all right. We got to move on to what we're here to talk about today. So, as I mentioned a second ago, this has been a hard year, as we've said many times on this show, and for many people, they may have experienced grief and loss at a higher level than typical. But as we also said, grief and loss are part of life, something that we all go through at some point. And so we thought that it was an important topic to discuss on the show. And there's at times in people's lives it's really challenging. It's hard to move forward after losing someone you love. And so we wanted to have Johanna on, who does this work, to talk to us a little bit more about what to expect, and then also, how to get yourself help if what you're experiencing is so challenging that it's hard to move forward. So Johanna, you gave us a really nice introduction to your title and who you work for, but maybe you could start by telling us a little bit more about your background and what kind of work you do.
Sure. So I am a clinical psychologist. I have, over the years, been in a number of different settings. So I've done a lot of work prior to my coming to Children's Friend, in hospitals, working with kids who are medically involved. I've done work with autism. I've done a lot of work more recently with kids with trauma, with gender issues, and of course, sort of threaded throughout for a number of years has been the grief work, which some of those things certainly touch on, as well as when people experience deaths. Apologize, I don't feel like I'm being very articulate.
Just to clarify, so you're saying that grief and loss can take on different forms. It's not just literally having someone pass away.
Exactly. So in our Carriage House Grief Support Program, those families who participate have all experienced the death of somebody close to them. However, it is important to note that grief and loss happens with all sorts of situations, for adults, a job loss, a move, a change, if you have somebody in your life who has a change in mental status. There are all sorts of situations in which you can experience a loss and be dealing with grief. And a lot of times people don't recognize that there's grief associated with those things.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah.
And let me add, for families, because this is an important one for a lot of families, when a pet dies.
Mm-hmm.
That is a big one for a lot of families.
Absolutely.
Sure.
We're speaking to a bunch of animal lovers who all have many pets at home. So,
yeah. So before we get too deep into the topic, we did touch on that, because of the pandemic, grief has been not only a little bit more prolific this year, but it also has changed the way that people normally grieve. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to that.
Absolutely. So a lot of times the groups that we belong to, the religious groups, the cultural groups, subcultural groups we belong to, sort of give us things that we're supposed to do, rituals, ways that we're supposed to behave, sort of when we are grieving. And that sounds sort of prescriptive, but it can really be helpful for us, right? In a time when our minds are elsewhere, we're struggling to sort of figure out how to take the next step. When we've got these rituals that tell us what to do, that can really be very comforting. during this pandemic, we haven't been able to do a lot of those things that we sort of think, oh, this is what I do. This is what my culture tells me I do. This is what my next steps are. And we can't get support from other people in the same way. So obviously, you know, large funerals where we get to be with people and people can let us know how much they're thinking about us, how much they care about us, how much they're supporting us, can't happen in the same way. And so to have those primary means of coping during such a difficult time sort of pulled out from under us can be really hard. And people are trying to make it work, you know, but Zoom isn't quite the same as actually being able to hug someone or have somebody stop by with a meal and sit down with you. So we've really had to sort of shift and figure out other things, other rituals. What else can we do?
Yeah, I was just gonna relate to that. We've had a couple of, within our department, some losses this year that we've experienced firsthand, and things look very different. It feels, I remember feeling some residual resentment about the fact that, you know, on top of feeling grief, that we couldn't have honored this person the way that we had wanted to, and really looking forward to, you know, maybe this summer or something, having the opportunity to have a do-over. But I remember when we were talking about this specifically, getting ready for today's episode, that, you know, part of this question was, do you have suggestions on other ways to sort of compensate for the fact that we can't carry out those same rituals?
Yeah, so I think what winds up happening is people figuring out more individually what they can do. So there are things that people can do, sort of smaller ceremonies for themselves that might help give that same, the sense of, and this is not at all the right word, but sort of closure, the sort of putting a, because it's not that things end with that ritual, but this sense of marking this important passage. And so people can do that within their families, for themselves, that can help with a piece of the function of these rituals. It does not get to the mutual support piece from, you know, being with other people. And with luck, as the weather is getting warmer, there might be more of that available. But especially through the winter, that piece has been really hard. But yeah, I think figuring out for yourself, okay, this is, you know, some people might write a letter to a person who died, and can then do a number of things with it, read it, bury it, burn it, keep it, you know, so people can figure out a ritual that works for them, and that will help with a piece of what the ritual normally does for us.
Thank you.
So Johanna, shifting more to the general topic of loss and death, why is it important to have conversations about death even before a loss occurs? And then kind of as an add-on to that, do you have any suggestions for having that conversation?
I'm so glad you asked that question. It is a great question because particularly in our culture, we have done so much to divorce death from everyday life and to make it really uncomfortable to talk about. Even people, you know, going to hospitals and being in a separate space rather than being in their own space, it's very, very separate. And younger kids often have not yet been taught that they shouldn't talk about it. And you can sort of see this discrepancy between kids and adults. But we teach them really well, and they learn that it makes people uncomfortable if we talk about it. So that's such a great question. It is very important, I think, to have these conversations so that when it does occur, it is not seen as, it is still terribly sad and difficult, but not, I'm going to use the word traumatic in a sort of literal sense of the term, because it is part of life. And so as we talk about it more normally, I think it allows people to recognize that this is part of life and it makes it easier to cope with when it happens. Within the context of families, especially, I think being able to just use the words. We often, when we train our volunteers in the Carriage House, we talk about using words, death, dying, rather than other terms. And we don't have we don't say to our participants to do it, but one of the reasons why we do that is to convey that we're comfortable talking about it. Another thing is just as things come up, not shying away. It's not that, a parent has to sort of hound on it and, no, you must sit here and talk about this, but just put something out there, conveying that you're okay to talk about it if your child or if somebody else wants to talk about it. You're not going to force it, but it's okay and comfortable to do so. Recognizing, particularly with kids, that they're very in the moment and they may talk for a minute or they may ask a question and then all of a sudden they want to go play basketball. And wait, what? I thought we were just talking about this very heavy topic. People do that, kids do that especially, that's okay. But making it known, making that you're comfortable, that you're open to having the conversation, I think is the most important thing.
What are some of the typical feelings or emotions that I guess both adults and kids might be feeling?
So, there are the obvious one, obviously sadness, emptiness. Sometimes people talk about feeling like a piece of them has died along with the person who has died. But there may be other things as well that are not as obvious. Relief, for example. Relief can come up I've known it in a number of circumstances when there's a long and really drawn out illness, a lot of pain, that kind of thing. So, and that can be hard to deal with, right? If somebody's feeling relief, they might then feel guilt. Should I be feeling this way? So mixed, a lot of mixed emotions, and that's very normal and really okay. I think in my experience, the folks who have the most difficulty emotions-wise is when they've had a really ambivalent relationship with the person who's died, and that can make it particularly complicated. No opportunity to resolve whatever was yet to be resolved.
So it sounds like there's a lot of different feelings that could be going on during this period. Could that be problematic if that's happening within a family, if everyone's feeling different ways about a loss?
It really can be. It can be very hard for people, especially in the context of a family, especially for the children, because they're not the ones who set the tone for how we do things in the house most often. So if the way they are grieving is significantly different, or the way they're coping is significantly different than the way their parent is coping, that can be really hard. I've known families where the adult kind of did this, I don't want to deal, I don't want to see anything that reminds me of the person who died. I'm taking down all the pictures, I'm taking away anything that reminds me of that person. And then the children are left with, wait a second, we want the reminders, we want this person's presence still here. And who brokers that? Who kind of helps manage that? So it's, frankly, it's a tall order to ask the adults to say, you know what, try to keep in mind what works for your children as well, because putting an additional emotional burden on somebody in a time like that is really hard. At the same time, if they can try to be aware of what will work best for their children as well as what will work for them, that will be helpful in the long run.
I'm wondering even down to things that parents, I know we're talking about the difference between kids and parents a little here. I'll just share, my grandmother passed away earlier this year, and I remember my son saying to me, he was kind of embarrassed. He said, "Mom, is it okay that I'm not really that sad?" And was looking for some, he was feeling like self-conscious about the fact that he wasn't sad enough. And, so I wonder if there's things that you have, suggestions for parents on things to say to their kids or what to look for any other tips or tricks that might be helpful.
Absolutely. And you remind me of another thing that I was thinking about, that, oftentimes, not so much during COVID, but when people are gathering after somebody dies, yeah, eventually conversations turn to more typical conversations, sometimes with humor. And I recall may have been my daughter sort of being confused.
Mhm.
Everybody's sad. Why are people now laughing and having normal conversations and so on? So I think similarly, this kind of looking to the adults for, wait, I think this is how folks are supposed to be feeling. This is how I'm supposed to be feeling. I don't quite feel. So yeah, conveying that whatever they're feeling is really okay. And different people have a different relationship with the person who died. And you don't have to be feeling a certain way. So really conveying that whatever you're feeling is okay, and mixed feelings are okay. Another thing that can be helpful is sort of checking in with kids. You think you've conveyed information in one way, and they may or may not have understood it the way that you mean to. And I'll tell you a story about my daughter when my grandfather died. That is, I was thinking, like, I'm a professional. I got this piece I can do, right? And she was close with my grandfather. So we were, before the funeral, I said to her, do you want to go up and see the body? He's in the coffin. And she said yes, but she was looking so scared. And I didn't know why. I didn't understand. We had talked about it. As I said, I'm a professional. I'm comfortable talking about this. So we hold hands and we walk up, and she sees him, and this sort of wave of relief washes over her. I said, what, honey, what were you thinking when I had said dead body, right? And in her mind, in her young mind at the time, that meant skeleton.
Oh.
So she thought that she was going to see sort of this skeleton corpse thing. And I had thought I had done this great communication because, I know what I'm talking about and I'm a professional. So sometimes if kids are not responding in quite the way you're expecting, check in with them. What is their understanding of the information that's communicated to them? I would also say communicate real information at a developmentally appropriate level. If there is something that the adults are sort of quietly talking about, there's a decent chance, in my experience, that the kids either figure out the real information or imagine something worse. And so sometimes, because of circumstances surrounding a death or who knows what, families are a little hesitant to share actual information. I think that can be harder. Family secrets can be harder, and kids often know that there is something going on that they're not privy to. So just coming up with developmentally appropriate language. They don't need every detail necessarily, but the real information, and then how to think about it, how to talk about it can be helpful.
I love that point because, kids will fill in the information on their own, and it can often, as you said, be worse than the reality, which is the opposite effect that parents are hoping for by keeping the information from them.
Exactly. And I think there's this notion that we're protecting kids, but when somebody has died, it's a difficult situation. There's no making it easy. And so recognizing that and being real with them can be very helpful.
Something we also didn't touch on is a timeline, Joanna. That there's, I think we almost see like we need to box things up, that it's kind of like grief happens, the death happens, and I should be healing by now. Is there a place is there a place that we should say I should be healing by now?
It's a funny thing, because on the one hand I say no, it goes on and on, but it should get easier, right? What we expect to see is that people can reinvest in life, people can function in life, and so it will continue, and it will maybe at a point feel easier, and then there will be a reminder, and you sort of get smacked in the face with it, and that's all. That's normal and okay, as long as you're really functioning and doing the things you need to do, and and living your own life, continuing or getting back into, I mean, obviously there will be a period where that is not the case, but getting back into life. If that isn't happening, if there is a continued real depression that does not allow somebody to reinvest in life, if they're not functioning, if there is increasing anger and resentment that is only getting worse and not better, those are some signs of what we call complicated grief, and maybe seeking some help more than the sort of typical social support at that point would probably be useful.
That was a perfect segue into what our last question was, which was, when would somebody need to seek some support for dealing with grief? And I imagine too that I lost my train of thought. I imagine lots of things.
I'm so glad that happens to other people too.
I wish I could remember. It was a great thought. What was it? Anyway, I'll put it in the chat if I can think of what it was. But yeah, it's a very complicated thing. Oh, I remember that if you start to be in a place where you can reinvest in life, I think people should also expect that that's complicated too, because you might start to feel some guilt around that, or shame around, the fact that you're able to move forward. I remember saying some resentment. I've worked with many people in the past who have just felt like resentment towards the rest of the world. Like, how can you keep going forward when this has happened? And it's very hard, as you said, I love that phrase, reinvest in life. It is really hard to move forward. And then it's complicated by the fact that when you finally, hopefully, are in that place where you might be able to move forward and find joy in life in other ways and new ways, that it can be complicated by additional feelings. And I think too, people might feel like, it's a slight towards that person that you lost or something like that, but that it's, that it doesn't mean that person is no longer important to you, or that you don't love them. It's a complicated experience.
It is, and I think you're absolutely right. And I often think about, what would that person want for you? And I think it is, in the vast majority of cases, it's likely that person would want you to live a full life.
Right. What a great place to end, right there. I guess one other quick piece, just to mention about children, that, I'm not a grief counselor, but we have had our hand in supporting families who have experienced the loss in the past. And I think sometimes with kids too, that especially if they're not much of a talker, if talking is not their style of communication, that you might also look for, excuse me, behavior changes. Do you have any other thoughts on that you might see from children? If not
Absolutely.
Talking?
Yeah, and some things are pretty typical, particularly with young children. If one parent has died, we often see an increase in separation anxiety with the other parent. That's pretty typical, and sometimes something that needs to be worked through and abates over time, typically, hopefully. But yes, you also might just see some behavioral regression. You might see increase in irritability. There can be a whole variety of things. And you make a good point that not everybody talks through everything. And so allowing for that, we say people cope differently, and then at the same time we say, talk about it. But everybody copes differently. And so finding what works for them. But yes, look for those signs of behavioral change and see how long they're lasting, to see if, okay, we need to maybe do something about it now. It's not just going to sort of abate over time.
Sure. Well, in our final minute, Johanna, do you want to mention the Carriage House and if we have anybody who's watching who could use some grief support, or any other resources that you think would be helpful to to residents?
Sure. Sure. So the Carriage House, during non-COVID times, we offer grief support groups for kids ages 3 to 18 whose parents, other primary caregivers, or siblings have died. We are currently doing some Zoom activities, but not doing our full groups because everybody's Zoomed out, but we are doing something, so people can call 508-753-5425 if they're interested in the Carriage House. There's also a program called Jeff's Place in Framingham. That is similarly a grief support program. There are some other programs throughout the state. One of the premises of these programs, including the Carriage House, is that grief is a normal and natural process, and it's not necessarily something that people need therapy for. So this is an opportunity to be with other people who have had similar experiences. So it's not about delving into anything, any deep, dark anything, feeling put on the spot as some people do in therapy. It's about an opportunity for peer support.
That's great. Wonderful. We will be sure to share those resources that you mentioned in our comments following today's show. And we're so appreciative for your time and your expertise to this topic as it's a challenging one for people to navigate. So thank you. We've had a number of heavy topics over the last month or so, and hopefully we've been sure to say happy spring to everybody at some point. We have talked about the beautiful weather outside. It's very sunny in this office and hot in here, which is a sign of weather change, and that's great. As a result, we're going to shift gears a little bit next week, which is the first week in April, which is exciting. Yeah. We are happy to bring in Joyce McMahon. Shannon, can you say Joyce's last name?
McNaughcus. Sorry, Joyce.
Sorry, Joyce. Joyce will be here. Joyce from the Southborough Garden Club is going to join us, and she's going to be talking to us about gardening. I do not have a green thumb. I'd love to have one though. Megan doesn't either.
No.
Shannon, you've got your plant behind you who's been with you most of Coffee Talk.
That's a house plant.
That's a house plant. So we all have varying levels of green thumbs. Some are just like a light shade of green. But Joyce is going to be talking to us about gardening. And one thing we do know is that gardening is a really beautiful form of mindfulness. It's about a lot of physical sensations that go into gardening, and we're all at varying levels. So Joyce is going to talk to us about lots of different options and also be doing a demonstration, I think, on an arrangement, which is exciting. So we hope to see you there. And again, Johanna, Sagarin, thank you for joining us today and for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
We'll see everybody next week.